The airport, the agent said, "I'm sorry, but there's no ticket under your name." My mother shrugged and said coldly, "Of course, we only booked for the family." My sister laughed. "Maybe you can take a cheap bus and catch you up?" I quietly walked away. Hours later, their faces turned pale. Elizabeth Morgan gazed at the rainy landscape outside the window while checking the flight reservation confirmation email on her PC screen once more. Her slender fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard, verifying that all details were correct. As an accountant by profession, she was meticulous about every single number. "Everything looks fine," she whispered to herself, tucking her long black hair behind her ear as she stood up from her chair. The living room walls were adorned with numerous family photographs. Perhaps only Elizabeth herself knew the complex emotions hidden behind those smiles. Elizabeth had been the family's organizer since childhood. Her mother, Diane, though a former teacher, was surprisingly irresponsible when it came to household matters. She was always obsessed with maintaining her youthful beauty, and prioritized her own desires above all else. Most notably, she blatantly favored Elizabeth's sister Amanda. "Elizabeth, how are your preparations for the European trip coming along?" her father Robert asked in a gentle voice as he entered the living room. He had just recently retired after a steady career as a banker. Behind his mild expression, there always seemed to be a hint of regret and resignation. Elizabeth felt a tightness in her chest whenever she saw her father, who had almost no say in family matters, overwhelmed by his wife's strong personality. "Yes, everything's on track. I've booked the hotel in Paris and arranged local tours," Elizabeth replied with a smile. Like other family trips, she had planned, reserved, and paid for most of this European vacation. It had become her role. "Well, isn't that nice? You're always so meticulous." Diane's voice came from the kitchen. She appeared with a wineglass in hand and looked Elizabeth up and down. "But don't you think you should buy more fashionable clothes? This is Europe, Elizabeth. Your overly simple taste will make you stand out when you're in photos with Amanda and the others." Elizabeth just smiled silently. Years of experience had taught her that arguing was pointless. "Mom, where should we put our suitcases?" Amanda's cheerful voice rang out from the entryway. She worked at a marketing company and was a fashionista who always kept up with the latest trends. Her husband James stood beside her holding a large suitcase. "Oh, Amanda, James, perfect timing. Elizabeth was just saying she's finished all the preparations." Diane rushed over to her daughter and husband, embracing Amanda. She smiled pleasantly at James too. He was an ambitious man making his way up in real estate, and Diane's favorite. "Thanks as always. Without you, this family trip would never have happened," Amanda said cheerfully, but her eyes lacked genuine gratitude. Elizabeth noticed this but responded pleasantly as usual. "You're welcome. As long as we can spend enjoyable time together as a family, that's what matters most." "Elizabeth is such a good girl," Robert said, "but maybe you should think about yourself sometimes. You're always focused on the family, Robert." Diane interrupted her husband. "Elizabeth is just fulfilling her role. Besides, she's single, so being useful to us must be her joy, right?" Elizabeth nodded slightly to her father and headed toward her room. Outside, the rain was growing stronger. She took a deep breath to calm her emotions. This was the usual scene. Her contributions were treated as a given, while even Amanda's minor assistance was lavishly praised. Still, she loved her family. That's why she had planned the perfect trip this time too. The next morning, Elizabeth woke up early to make final preparations. She checked the passports, printed the reservation confirmations, and prepared envelopes of exchanged euros for everyone. Her suitcase was smaller and more modest than the others in the family. "Everyone, it's time to leave," Elizabeth called out in the living room. Robert appeared first, followed by Amanda and James hand in hand. Finally, Diane appeared with perfect makeup and a stylish travel outfit. "Now, our European adventure begins," Diane exclaimed excitedly. Elizabeth smiled silently. Atlanta International Airport was bustling with morning activity. The departure lobby was filled with travelers from around the world and various languages floated through the air. Elizabeth led the family toward the check-in counter. She held a folder of documents in both hands and wore a gentle smile on her face. "Flight to Paris," she told the airline employee. "Reservation for the Morgan family." "Yes, just a moment please," the young female clerk quickly typed on her keyboard. "Ms. Morgan, reservation for 5 people, correct?" Elizabeth nodded. The clerk stared at the screen, slightly furrowing her brow. Please wait a moment, she began checking another screen. Diane tapped Elizabeth's shoulder with an impatient sigh. Is there a problem? We don't have much time. The clerk is checking, Elizabeth answered calmly. Amanda and James were talking quietly behind them, occasionally laughing. Robert waited silently. I'm sorry, the clerk finally spoke. I can confirm reservations for Diane, Robert, Amanda, and James, but she hesitantly looked at Elizabeth. There seems to be no reservation for Elizabeth. Elizabeth looked confused. That's strange, I made reservations for everyone. She took out her smartphone to open the confirmation email. But before she could, Diane stepped forward. I'm sorry, Diane said in a calm voice. Actually, we didn't make a reservation for her. Elizabeth stared at her mother. What are you saying? I made the reservations for everyone. Diane shrugged, looking down at Elizabeth with icy eyes. Of course, you only booked for family members. Elizabeth was speechless. She felt as if the surrounding sounds were fading away. Amanda stepped forward and said with a laugh, Maybe you could follow us by cheap bus? Though Paris is quite far. She exchanged glances with James and giggled. Elizabeth. Robert began to speak, but was silenced by Diane's sharp glare. He looked down, unable to meet his daughter's eyes. In Elizabeth's mind, the events of the past few weeks flashed by like a slideshow. The airline tickets she had booked, the itinerary she had planned, the hotels she had arranged, and how her mother had said, I'll do the final check, and asked for her password. Everything connected. I understand, Elizabeth finally spoke. Her voice was surprisingly calm. I hope you have a pleasant trip. Elizabeth, Diane began, but Elizabeth had already turned away. It's fine, Mom. Looks like my role ended here. Elizabeth slowly walked away from the check-in counter and disappeared into the crowd. Behind her, Diane was giving instructions to Amanda and James, while Robert was still staring at the floor. Elizabeth found a cafe in the airport and sat by the window. Outside, planes were taking off one after another. She ordered a coffee and took out her smartphone while waiting. The waitress brought her warm drink. Thank you, Elizabeth smiled and took a sip. The warm liquid flowed down her throat, calming her heart a little. She took out her laptop from her bag and turned it on. When the screen lit up, Elizabeth logged into the travel agency website. All the reservations for the entire family were listed in her account. Diane had accessed her account and simply removed Elizabeth's name. Just as I thought, she whispered. Next, she checked the hotel reservation information. A luxury hotel in Paris, then Nice, Rome, and finally London. All were booked under her name. Tours and restaurant reservations were the same. The family didn't know it, but Elizabeth had been in charge of everything for this trip. A new message arrived on her phone. It was from Amanda. Sorry. But Mom says you're always trying to control us, so you needed a lesson. We'll talk properly when we get back next week. Elizabeth finished reading the message and quietly set down her phone. She stared out the window for a long time. Finally, she took a deep breath and turned back to her laptop with a determined expression. It's not me who needs a lesson. Elizabeth logged back into the travel agency site and opened the reservation information. Her fingers danced over the keyboard, performing various operations on the screen. This is the price for leaving me behind. Several hours later, Elizabeth had moved to another cafe. From this one, she could see the international departure gates. She checked the time. Her family's flight should be over the Atlantic by now. Would you like a refill, ma'am? The waitress asked. Thank you, but I'm fine now, Elizabeth smiled. I'm heading to my next destination. She closed her laptop and put it in her bag. A new flight reservation confirmation email had arrived on her smartphone. The destination was not Paris. Elizabeth quietly stood up and headed for the airport exit. Charles de Gaulle International Airport was bathed in the morning light of Paris. The arrival lobby of Europe's largest airport was filled with the hustle and bustle of travelers from around the world. With multiple languages floating through the air, Diane Morgan, with fatigue from the 11-hour flight showing on her face, placed her hand on Amanda's shoulder. We've finally arrived. Feel the wonderful Parisian air. Amanda took out a mirror and smiled as she fixed her hair, disheveled from the long journey. This hotel is 5-star, right? I think it's the best one Elizabeth booked. James, while operating his smartphone, said the shuttle should be waiting in the arrival lobby. That's what Elizabeth's email said. Robert silently followed behind the family, dragging his luggage. His eyes showed not only fatigue but some inexplicable guilt. She must be angry, he said softly. Diane turned to her husband and narrowed her eyes. Robert, are you still thinking about that? We did the right thing. Elizabeth always tries to control everything. She needs to learn how to deal with problems on her own sometimes. But canceling her airline ticket? It's a lesson, Diane said firmly. Besides, she has money. She could have come on another flight. Amanda sighed. I sent a message to my sister. But there's no reply. She must be sulking. The four of them exited to the arrival lobby and began looking for the shuttle. James tilted his head and looked around. Strange. It should be here. He checked his smartphone again. The name of the shuttle company was Paris Elite Transfer, right? Amanda peered over her husband's shoulder at the screen. Yes, that's what Elizabeth said. 30 minutes passed. The shuttle still hadn't appeared. Robert sat down on a nearby bench with a tired expression. James, why don't you call the shuttle company? Diane said, unable to hide her irritation. James called the shuttle company. Hello, is this Paris Elite Transfer? He paused briefly before continuing. I'd like to confirm a reservation for the Morgan party. His expression gradually clouded. Cancelled? When? He looked at his family. Yes, I understand, thank you. After hanging up, James turned to his family with a confused expression. The reservation was cancelled, they say. Yesterday, on instructions from the person who made the booking. What? Diane's voice rose an octave. Elizabeth? Why would she do such a thing? Anyway, let's get a taxi. Robert made a practical suggestion. We can figure things out once we get to the hotel. The group headed to the taxi stand and headed into the city with their large suitcases. The beautiful Parisian scenery flowed past the windows. As the Eiffel Tower began to appear in the distance, the taxi entered a luxury hotel district. Le Royal Monceau Paris. James confirmed the hotel name. According to Elizabeth's email, we have a 5-night reservation here. The group, stepping out in front of the hotel with its magnificent facade, was filled with anticipation about staying at a luxury Paris hotel, despite their fatigue. Bonjour. A young woman at the front desk greeted them with a smile. Do you have a reservation? Yes. James stepped forward. The Morgan party. We have a 5-night reservation. The woman began operating the computer. Her expression subtly changed. I'm sorry, but I cannot find a reservation under your name. Please check again. Morgan, Diane approached the counter, unable to hide her anxiety. I have checked, but the woman looked at the screen once more. There was a reservation for Morgan, but it was cancelled yesterday. Cancelled? The four exclaimed in unison. Yes. It was cancelled on instructions from Elizabeth Morgan, the person who made the reservation. Diane's face turned pale. This must be some mistake. We're staying in Paris for 5 days. Where are we supposed to stay? The front desk clerk apologetically said, I'm sorry, but we are currently fully booked. I recommend looking for another hotel. Staggering with confusion and fatigue, the group returned to the hotel lobby. Robert took out his cell phone. Let's look for another hotel. There must be other good hotels in this area. Amanda looked anxious. It's the tourist season in Paris. Won't everywhere be fully booked? James took out his laptop and opened a reservation site. There seemed to be a few vacancies. A bit expensive. But he took out his credit card and entered the information. That's strange, he frowned. The card isn't going through. Use mine, Diane offered her card. But the result was the same. Let me try mine, Robert said. His card was also declined. What on earth is happening? Diane was on the verge of panic. None of our cards are working. Amanda took out her cell phone and opened her banking app. Mom, my account, the balance is 0. Similarly, the other 3 checked their accounts. Funds had been withdrawn from everyone's accounts. Is this Elizabeth's doing? James said in disbelief. Robert sighed deeply. She had access rights. We entrusted all the family's financial management to her. Amanda was on the verge of tears. I can't believe she would do something like this. Diane's expression was a mixture of anger and fear. She's gone crazy to take such revenge. James tried to access the family's shared cloud on his smartphone. Strange. I can't access the photos. Amanda tried the same thing. Me neither. All the photos and videos are gone. At that moment, email notifications sounded simultaneously on all 4 smartphones. The sender was Elizabeth Morgan. Robert opened the email and read it aloud. Dear family, what happened at Atlanta Airport was the last straw for me. For years I have served, planned, and paid for the family. And what have I received in return? Contempt and betrayal. Now you are experiencing the position I was put in. No reservations, no money, feeling abandoned. This is the price for leaving me behind, Elizabeth. Silence enveloped the four. Robert held his head in his hands. Amanda began to cry. James sat down with a dazed expression, and Diane, for the first time, was at a loss for words. What should we? Amanda said through tears. What should we do? We have no money, no hotel. Let's go to the embassy, Robert suggested. They might be able to help. But the language? Diane looked confused by the French conversations around her. She had always counted on Elizabeth to translate. Let's go to the police, James said. This is a crime. Elizabeth stole our money. The police? Diane's voice trembled. But she's my daughter, and what she's saying has some truth to it. The other three looked at Diane with surprised expressions. Mom, you're the one who suggested it, Amanda accused, leaving my sister behind. I know, Diane shouted, but I didn't think it would come to this. Robert quietly said, we hurt her deeply. For many years. The four were at a loss in the hotel lobby. The beautiful morning light of Paris streamed through the windows, making the ironic contrast feel even more miserable. Let's go to the embassy anyway, Robert suggested again. We'll manage from there. They left the hotel, dragging their heavy suitcases. The streets of Paris were full of life, but the Morgan family's faces were pale, filled with anxiety and regret. Meanwhile, Elizabeth was in another location across the Atlantic, quietly drinking coffee while staring at her laptop screen. The screen showed transaction histories of her family's credit cards and bank accounts. All travel-related expense refunds had been deposited into her personal account. First solo trip, not bad, she whispered to herself. At a beachside hotel in Miami, Elizabeth sat on the balcony with her laptop on her knees, gazing at the gentle waves of the Atlantic. Beside her were fresh orange juice and a croissant. She had chosen a place exactly opposite to Paris, where her family had been left stranded. All right, next step, she murmured to herself. Elizabeth clicked several times and opened her social media account. She normally didn't use social media much, but today was different. She checked the long post she had prepared, took a deep breath and pressed the A post button. Important announcement about my family relationships. For years I have been responsible for planning, arranging and paying for family events and trips. This European trip was no exception. However, at Atlanta Airport, I discovered that the family had not made a reservation for just me. My mother told me we only booked for family members, and my sister mockingly said, "Maybe you could follow us by cheap bus?" My father just watched in silence. This is the reward for years of dedication. By now they have realized that all the reservations I made in Paris have been cancelled. Sometimes in life, you need to learn the consequences of your actions. The post included an audio file secretly recording the exchange at the airport. Elizabeth normally wouldn't publicize such private matters, but this was an exception. This wasn't just revenge, but putting an end to years of unfair treatment. Within minutes, comments and reactions began pouring in. Messages of surprise and sympathy arrived one after another from relatives and mutual friends. Next, she accessed the airline website. After checking the reservation information for her family's return flight, she canceled all the reservations. The refunds would go into her account. That completes it, Elizabeth murmured. She felt no regret. For years the family had taken her contributions for granted. This action might be extreme, but it was a necessary lesson. Meanwhile in Paris, the Morgan family was at a loss in a small waiting room at the American embassy. They had somehow made it to the embassy and were explaining their situation. So your daughter canceled all the reservations for revenge and withdrew money from your accounts? Embassy official Johnson asked for confirmation. That's right, Diane answered in a tired voice. We heard her. We can provide emergency travel funds, but the amount will be limited, Johnson explained. We can also help arrange a return flight, but it won't be for at least 3 days. 3 days? Amanda said, wiping away tears. Where are we supposed to stay? At that moment, James's smartphone rang. He looked at the screen and his face changed color. What is it? Amanda asked. It's my parents, James said with a troubled expression. They say they saw Elizabeth's social media post. Everyone seems to know. Diane turned pale. Social media? What did she write? James read the post. When he finished, a heavy silence fell over the room. Even a recording. Diane said in an almost inaudible voice. At that moment, Amanda's phone began ringing. Messages from friends were arriving one after another. Everyone, about us. She broke down in tears. What terrible things we did to my sister, we. Robert silently looked out the window. His eyes were filled with sadness and regret. We should go to the police, James suggested again. She broke the law. She took our money. No, Diane suddenly said in a strong tone. We were wrong. What Elizabeth is saying is right. We've been taking her for granted. We didn't appreciate her contributions, and in the end, we left her behind. Amanda looked at her mother with a surprised expression. Mom, I was the worst, Diane continued. Her voice trembled, and tears welled in her eyes. I always put her second, favoring you, Amanda, and taking her efforts for granted. Robert approached his wife and placed a hand on her shoulder. I was wrong too, for staying silent and not protecting her. In the embassy room, the family was finally confronting their actions and years of patterns. Amanda took out her cell phone, trying to send a message to her sister. What should I write? She said through tears. Sorry isn't enough. Write the truth, Robert said quietly, a sincere apology. Diane took her smartphone and took a deep breath. She stared at the screen for a long time before finally beginning to write. Elizabeth, it's Mom. I sincerely apologize for everything I've done to you, for leaving you behind at the airport, for taking your contributions for granted all these years, for favoring Amanda. I've made selfish decisions without considering your feelings, and I've hurt you. Now we're at a loss in Paris, but we deserve it. I know we don't deserve to ask for your help, but if you give us a chance to talk, I want to build a different relationship going forward. I am truly, truly sorry. She sent the message and quietly began to cry. In Miami, Elizabeth was reading the email from Diane. She read it over and over, thinking for a long time. There was still anger and hurt in her heart. But there was something in her mother's words, an honesty that had never been there before. She began writing a reply to Mom. I read your email. Honestly, I still feel anger and sadness. For years, I have not been recognized as a family member but treated like a mere coordinator. My contributions were taken for granted, and my feelings were secondary. What happened at the airport is just the tip of the iceberg. It's the result of years of accumulated patterns. My actions against you may be extreme, but they are an expression of the desperation and anger I've felt. If you are truly repentant, I am willing to talk. But understand that our relationship from now on will be different from before. I will never again lower my value. What I ask for is recognition and respect for my contributions, equal treatment for all family members, and above all, respect for my boundaries. I understand that you are in trouble in Paris. Before offering assistance, I want to make my conditions clear. After returning home, participate in family counseling and seriously discuss our future relationship. If you can agree to that, I will send the necessary funds and rebook your return flight. Elizabeth, she sent the email and exhaled deeply. This could be a new beginning, or it could be a final goodbye. Either way, she was determined to protect her value. A few minutes later, a reply from Diane arrived. It was a short reply. Elizabeth, I agree to all your conditions. We will change. I promise. Thank you. Elizabeth smiled quietly. She opened her laptop and began the process of sending emergency funds for her family. And she booked return flights. This time she booked airline tickets for all 5 people. She herself decided to continue her solo trip to Miami as planned. She needed this time to face her family after returning home. At a small cafe in the suburbs of Atlanta, Elizabeth Morgan held her coffee cup with both hands, gazing at the autumn foliage outside the window. 8 months had passed since that incident. Her expression showed confidence and composure that hadn't been visible before. Elizabeth. Turning around, she saw her mother Diane approaching with a smile. In her eyes, there was warmth and a little anxiety instead of the previous arrogance. Mom, I thought you'd be late. Elizabeth stood up and lightly embraced her mother. The counseling ran a little longer, Diane said as she sat down. But we had a good discussion today. Elizabeth nodded quietly. After the Paris incident, the family had begun group counseling, as promised. Diane in particular was also taking individual sessions, trying to understand her behavioral patterns. I got a message from Amanda. Elizabeth took out her smartphone. She and Dad are preparing dinner. Diane smiled. I can't believe Amanda is cooking. She's changed too, Elizabeth said softly. After that incident, Family relationships had changed dramatically. The first few weeks were full of tension and awkwardness, but through counseling and honest dialogue, a new relationship gradually formed. Amanda, for the first time, recognized the impact of her words and actions, and was making efforts to repair her relationship with her sister. James also deepened his understanding of Elizabeth, and came to respect her as an important family member. And above all, Robert broke his years of silence, and began actively expressing his opinions within the family. "How are the plans for next month's family trip?" Diane asked. Elizabeth smiled. "Going well. Everyone is cooperating, so it's very enjoyable." This time, the trip planning wasn't all on Elizabeth's shoulders. The whole family was sharing responsibilities. Robert was in charge of transportation. Amanda and James were handling accommodations. Diane was planning activities, and Elizabeth was coordinating the whole. And the costs were being shared fairly. "I still think about that day sometimes," Diane suddenly said with a serious expression. "Leaving you behind at the airport. I'm truly sorry." Elizabeth placed her hand on her mother's. "It's in the past now, Mom. What's important is what we've learned from it." "Yes," Diane smiled with tears in her eyes. "You were a strong girl, I just couldn't see it." The two drank their coffee in silence for a while, each immersed in their own thoughts. "By the way," Diane changed the subject. "How's your new job?" Elizabeth's face brightened. "Very fulfilling. I'm in an environment where I can use my skills, and my colleagues are wonderful." After the Paris incident, Elizabeth made a big decision. She left the accounting firm where she had worked for years and became an independent travel planning consultant, pursuing her passion. Her organizational skills and attention to detail were highly valued in her new career. "Maybe it was that incident that gave me the courage to understand my own worth," she said quietly. By the time they left the cafe, dusk was gently enveloping the town. While walking toward the car, they talked about the upcoming family dinner. When they arrived at Elizabeth's house, Robert was standing at the entrance. A warm smile was on his face. "Welcome back," he embraced his daughter. "Amanda's making a fuss in the kitchen. Could you help her?" From inside the house, Amanda's voice and James's laughter could be heard. Elizabeth took a deep breath, wrapped in a comfortable feeling. This was the family she had sought for years. Not perfect, but a family that respects and loves each other. "Let's go," she said with a smile. "They probably need help." The door opened, and warm light and laughter welcomed them. Elizabeth paused for a moment, imprinting this precious moment in her heart. She thought that sometimes life leads us through unexpected paths to the place we truly sought. The painful separation at the airport had opened the door to a new beginning for her.